I don't check and I'm recording off the USB, then that's bad. Okay, so there's on here, there's not going to be labels, obviously, on the test. And that's just going to be like A, B, C, D. That's how basic your ability to recognize parts in the motherboard is going to be on chapter 1. Okay, chapter 4, when we get to there, you're going to have to know what every single one of these plugs is on the motherboard. Every single stinking one. Every single thing that's labeled plus some, you're going to have to know when we get to chapter 4. But right now, we just need to be able to identify where the CPU goes, where the memory goes, which is these long slots right here. Ignore the color because every motherboard is colored differently. I'm not going to say what color are all memory slots on a motherboard because they're all different. The colors do mean something though. The colors match things together. So when I look at this motherboard, these two slots, if you can't tell, those are 2 and there's 2, there's 4 altogether here. These two go together and those two go together, and that's why they're colored differently. Okay? Sometimes the slots colored the same, there's little snaps on the end are colored differently. All they do is say those two kind of go together, but they don't mean they're different kinds of memory. So the memory goes there. This whole section here that says back panel connectors are our integrated components. And integrated, if you don't know what it means included. Those are the things that are included with our motherboard. If it's back here on the integrated component, it means that I got that ability on my motherboard that this motherboard may have and some other motherboard may not have. So those are things that are integrated or included with that particular motherboard. Okay? So that's, and it's hard to see it from that picture, but it's these things back here that stick out. Okay? They come with the motherboard, and it may be different things. And then the last one down here, right there, are our expansion ports. Okay? Those give us the ability to expand this computer to do new things, better things, or more things. Okay? This particular motherboard already has a video card, but I might put a better one in an expansion slot, or another one. It may have a network card, but I may put a better one. So expansion ports expand the capability of this PC. They're easily added and easily installed, and there's a whole bunch of different types, and that doesn't matter what the types are right now. That's a chapter 4 thing. Okay? So these are all different sizes. You can see that one's long. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on this particular motherboard. You don't need to know the kinds. You just need to know all these slots down here together are the expansion slots for the PC. Okay? Or the expansion ports for the PC, and that's where we expanded. Were you going to ask a question, Ian? No. Okay, so those are our big kind of 4 things that at this point we need to understand. That there are 4 general areas. And in a motherboard, I'm going to erase this. Did you guys write this down? Can I erase? Okay. In a motherboard, the design of the motherboard determines where these things are. Okay. It's called the form factor. Okay. So all the motherboards that we're going to talk about really fall into the same form factor, which is the major one that everything is today, and it's called ATX. And it says that the back panel goes before the CPU, which goes before the memory, and that's the way it's laid out. And big CPUs may have more of this. Little tiny motherboards may only be that big. So when we look at a little computer like this, and this is a computer, it just doesn't have any of this. There's none of that. But all that is right there inside there. Okay? It all exists. This is a Windows 7 PC. Okay? It all exists inside of there, and it's set up in the exact same order. If it's an ATX, that one's actually not an ATX, it's better. example, Mr. Anderson had a nice tiny one. But the form factor lays out these things, and the form factor says that's the kind of memory that goes in there, that's the kind of CPU that goes in there, and that design there. Okay? So from what I've already said, everything has to be connected to the motherboard. Everything has to be, it connects everything together. It's the largest circuit board in every single PC. There's no PC that has a bigger one. Though some have ginormous video cards, they're still not as big as that. And then we need to know those basic things. So our integrated, our CPU, our memory, and our expansion area all exist the same on every motherboard we look at. Okay? No matter which kind I throw at you, it may be different colors, but the basic layout is the same. It always goes integrated, CPU, memory, expansion. And I could grab, I've got a ton of them back there, but I could grab any ATX motherboard, and even though they look different, the colors are different, that basic layout stays the same. Okay? I got my integrated, that's the CPU on this one, it just doesn't have a cooler on top of it. Okay, so there's my integrated, my CPU, my memory, my expansion cards. It may be slightly bigger, these other plugs may be in different places around my computer, around my motherboard, but the basic components are always in the exact same places. So the motherboards, or the CPU slot may be different. We're going to talk about that in chapter 4 too. Those two are decidedly different kinds of motherboards right there. I already said everything I wanted to say about motherboards. Do you have any questions on motherboards? So everything connects to it. Everything. Okay, the most important thing in our motherboard, or connected to our motherboard, the purpose of the motherboard is to make everything really connect to this one piece, our CPU, or our central processing unit. Okay? It's, if we say the other things, the circulatory system or the nervous system, this is the brain. Okay? It's where the majority of the processing takes place. Not all. There are other places the processing takes place. But a majority of all the thinking by the computer happens here at the CPU. Okay? It is one of the most important parts of our PC. Unfortunately, it's the only part that people talk about when they buy a computer. What's the speed of the CPU? Well, that's not the only thing that determines the speed of the computer, but it's just one part, but it's the easy part. When you go to Walmart and you look at it, it says what the speed of the CPU is. Usually it doesn't tell you anything else. Okay? So there's different kinds of CPUs and there are different speeds of CPUs. CPUs are measured in hertz, or cycles per second. As they're processing, there's a sine wave pattern of how it processes, okay? And 1 cycle per second is a hertz. Okay, 1 cycle per second is a hertz. And CPUs are measured in gigahertz. Okay, measured in gigahertz. So, side lesson. If a hertz is 1 cycle per second, what is 1,000 cycles per second? This is a 1,000. Okay, but what is it? What would the
1,000 hertz? Wait, 1 gigahertz.
One? Okay, what's 1,000 from our metric lessons that we know from metrics? 1,000 is a... Oh, Mr. Bryant and Mr. Swire will be so sad right now. 1,000 is a what? Ah! Nobody knows a kilo? Okay, so 1,000 is a kilohertz. That's LO hertz, which equals 1,000 cycles per second. What's a million? We need to know these, by the way. The whole class, you're going to need to know these metric terms. If 1,000's a kilo, a billion is a...
Second? I don't know.
Really? Nobody? Mega.
Oh.
Okay? A million is a mega. And I'm saying this is important because we're going to use these in all of our different terms. Okay? So, 1 is whatever system we're working on. 1,000 is a kilo. A million is a mega. M-E-G-A. Megahertz. Okay? And we just said we're dealing in gigahertz. G-I-G-A. So how many is that? A billion. Okay? It's a billion. Okay, so when we say that we're measuring CPUs in gigahertz, we're measuring it in billions of cycles per second. When I first started in computers, we were back at 4 megahertz, my first PC. 4 megahertz. And we thought that was fast. It was in 4 billion things per second. Holy moly! And now we're talking about billions, okay? So we need to know these. Base unit of measurement may not be hertz. We talk about it in bytes and kilobytes and megabytes and gigabytes of data as well. Okay, so it's the base measurement. Kilo is 1,000, mega is a million, and giga is a billion. And the next one up is tera. Okay, tera is 1,000 billion. Okay, or a trillion. So that's what the T's for. We'll talk about that when we get to hard drives. Okay, because we have terabyte hard drives now, so they're a trillion bytes of data. So those are we don't go any further than tera in this class, but there are higher units of obviously in measurements. So when we say that we're talking about CPU in gigahertz, for instance, a CPU may have a speed of 3.2 gigahertz, which means it does 3.2 billion computations per second. 3.2 billion per second. So that's how we measure. That's the base unit of measurement. There's other ways to measure CPUs, but that's the one that you guys need to know today. Okay? So if we're talking about CPU speeds, we're talking about in gigahertz. Motherboards also have speeds in hertz, because when we talk about a motherboard, the data has to go around here back to that CPU, okay? The data has to cycle around the motherboard back to the CPU, and it also has speeds. Usually we talk about those speeds in megahertz. Sometimes we talk about it in gigahertz, but they're never as fast. The motherboard is never as fast as the CPU, because the CPU is like right there. It's little tiny. In fact, the amount of information on a CPU, let me see if I can find one that actually shows you the size. This is not the size of the CPU. This is a CPU. But the actual size of the processor inside there is very, very, very tiny. And I don't think I have one that actually shows the actual size up here. I don't. If you looked at a laptop one, it's about that big inside your laptop. So motherboards have speeds. They're measured in the same way as CPUs, but they're always much slower than the CPU, because all that information has to come around the motherboard and get back to the CPU. So one of the primary functions of the motherboard isn't just to connect everything, it's to connect everything to the CPU. Okay? So everything has to talk back here to the CPU, or otherwise what's it doing on my computer? Because if all the processing is going on here, the information has to get there. So the motherboard transmits all that data to the CPU. Okay? And it's a very organized method of transmission. Okay? Everything moves around the motherboard at the exact same rate, and it all comes to the CPU and back out of the CPU, because that's where all the computation is taking place. Okay, so you guys do need to know this. Base unit measurement, then kilo, mega, giga, and tera are important terms You guys need to know, I guarantee 100% there will be a matching question that looks just like this on the Chapter 1 test. Okay? Guarantee. I already talked about that. I have a slide that I was going to talk about that. There's my increments and measure that I just talked about. Okay. So, the CPU is the brain. The motherboard is what connects the brain to all the different parts of the computer. But the brain doesn't have the ability to do everything in itself, meaning that it can't hold all the data in itself. So its primary place to hold things is the system memory. Okay? And so memory is also called primary storage. It is where the CPU stores stuff while it's working. Only the CPU stores stuff there. We can't save stuff to memory. We say we want to save stuff, the CPU says, I want to put it here. Okay? But this is where the CPU talks all the time. And when I say all the time, I mean billions of times a second. It's reading and writing information back and forth from here. Okay? It's kind of like this, kind of like that notepad you're writing in right now. That the CPU has memory. It has such a minuscule amount of memory. Okay? We'll say it's got a business card. We'll say it's got a sticky note. Okay? This is all Isaac's CPU has for memory. Okay? But Isaac's CPU also has a notepad right here. Okay? And anytime it wants to, it can transfer things from itself to that notepad, and it's that close. Okay? And it's really, really fast. This memory is way faster than this memory because it has to go out to the motherboard to write it down here, out to the system memory, but it's where the CPU stores stuff while it's thinking. It's the primary place where the CPU stores stuff while it's thinking. Okay? So, because it's the primary place that it stores stuff, the more memory we have to limit inside a PC, the faster it goes. It has other places it can store things. It has secondary places, but this is the primary place. So the memory is where the CPU holds things while it's doing computations, while it's thinking. Okay? So, although this is a bad example, if you were in a math class, okay, and Mr. Alexander gave you one sticky note and a pad of paper, and he put the pad of paper over here. Okay? And he told Isaac, you could do any work you want to on that sticky note right here, but whenever you need to, you can walk over here and use the pad of paper too. Okay? So Isaac's got this little tiny sticky note, and when Isaac's done, he can give him a new sticky note because we can clear out what's on the CPU, but he can run over here anytime he wants to and use this paper over here. It's not as fast. He only has to turn around to get to it. Okay? It's not terribly slow, but it would slow him down on his test if there was more sticky notes. Okay? We'll talk about what the sticky note kind of compares to in my analogy. But this is where Isaac's going to write down most of his stuff over here, so he's going to have to turn around and write it down over here. There's another place Isaac can write to. It's in another room. It's down in the library. Okay. Okay, so memory is where it's called primary storage. By the way, that is a matchy thing. What is primary storage on a PC? Primary storage is a system memory. And it goes in these slots right here, these memory slots. So what determines how much memory I can put in a PC? And what determines? What determines how much memory I can put in a PC? The motherboard does. The motherboard determines how much memory I can put in the PC because I can't add slots, right? So the motherboard determines tons of things about our PC. How many people went out and said, I gotta buy a new PC. What kind of motherboard does it have at Walmart? Walk up to the Walmart salesman and you go, hey, what kind of motherboard is this guy? Any chance he's going to know the answer to that question? No, he's not. But the motherboard decides tons of things about our computer, and it's, in general, the last thing people even think about when they buy a PC. The only thing people usually think about when they buy a PC is the CPU? They go, how fast is the CPU? And they go, oh, it's a 3.2 gigahertz. I'm like, all right. And then you take it home and find out the motherboard stinks. Okay? Because the motherboard, there's no way to put extra ones of these in. If it's got 4 spots, it's got 4 spots. If it's got 2 spots, it's got 2 spots. And if it's only got 2 spots, there's only so much memory I can put in it. Okay? So what I'm trying to bring out is all these things are related. Okay? When we buy a PC, all the parts matter because some of them are not easily changeable. This is the worst part to try to upgrade because really it means you're building a whole new PC. Okay? So while it's the last thing people think about is the motherboard when they buy a PC, it's what determines how much memory. It's what determines what kind of CPU can go in there. Okay, because these, by the way, there's about 20 different kinds of connections there that are possible, and it's like Legos and Mega Bloks. Okay, they kind of go together, but they don't go together well, and it won't work. Okay, so it has to be the right part there to put in the right CPU. So the memory is, I know I'm jumping back and forth. There we go. The memory is primary storage. The kind that goes in it is determined by the motherboard. It's part of that form factor. Okay? So the motherboard form factor determines what kind of memory we can buy and what kind we can use. Okay? There are currently today 2 types of memory being used. When I say types, I mean that have different notches in them and snap in differently. If you look at this one has 2 notches, this one has 1. They don't go in the same motherboard. But even among this one that's exactly the same, there could be about 20 different speeds available of memory. So it has to be the right memory for the motherboard we're talking about. Okay? So memory, primary storage for the CPU, is determined by the motherboard form factor, and the more we have to a limit, the faster our computer will go. Okay. So the next thing we've got in every computer is a hard drive. And hard drives are secondary storage. S-T-O-R-A-G-E. Okay? They're secondary storage. And when we say they're secondary storage, they're secondary for the CPU. The CPU hates the hard drive. It's like, the distant cousin that it never got along with. Okay? That's Isaac's notes in the library. Mr. A said you can use the sticky pad. If you want to, you can turn around and use this. And you can use the math book, but it's in the library and you can only be there for 5 seconds at a time. Take your test and go. And Isaac's going, he's ready to respond. And then he comes over here and goes, oh, crap, I gotta look up the question. And he's gotta run all the way down the library, and he's got 5 seconds to look at the question, then he runs back here and sits down. That's the hard drive. The CPU uses the hard drive, but it doesn't use it directly. It only talks to memory because it's snobby. And this guy is slow. It's like a horse-drawn carriage compared to my Lamborghini out in the driveway. Does it move? Yes. But in comparison, it moves pretty darn slow. So the CPU only talks to memory, and there's a memory controller that says, okay, you're full. I gotta put you somewhere. By the way, Isaac doesn't have unlimited pages. He's only got 5. Okay? And whenever his 5 pages fills up, Nick, he's our memory controller, he's got to do something. Isaac needs 5 pages. So what's he do? Nick's got to go and run him down to the library and set him down on the table so that he can get to him if he needs to. And he brings a fresh piece of paper down here and sets it down here. Because Isaac's only talking to that sticky note in here. Really, he's sitting Nick down to the library to grab his pieces of paper and bring them back here when he needs them. Okay? So what happens is memory gets swapped out back and forth with the hard drive. Okay, it's slow in comparison. Very slow in comparison. And I didn't say this, I forgot to write this down. This is considered permanent storage. In other words, when I write to the hard drive, it will be there forever until I delete it or the hard drive gets corrupted and dies on me. But that, we'll pretend that never happens. And I forgot to say this back here. System memory is primary storage, and it's volatile or temporary storage. Okay? If there's a power fluctuation, things in memory go bye-bye. Okay? Which is why we put things on backup power and stuff so that if there's a power fluctuation, it doesn't go away. But even though memory is primary to the CPU, it's still volatile and it's temporary. But hard drives are permanent, but they're secondary because they're slow in comparison to memory. Okay? Thousands of times slower to read and write to a standard hard drive than it is to write to a stick of memory. It's got to run around the motherboard. It doesn't talk directly to the CPU, because the CPU only talks directly to two things, one of which is the memory. It's really snobby. Okay? So hard drives are permanent storage. They're secondary storage to the CPU. When we say save, when we save things, it's saving it here. Okay? But that's us saving it there. Okay? So it's permanent. When we save things to a hard drive, it stays there. These aren't the only two kinds of hard drives. I don't have a picture of it, but this is a spinny drive like this one right here. This is what a traditional drive is like. Okay? It has a magnetic read-write head. It spins around. The slowest hard drive spins around at 5,400 revolutions per minute. They go really fast. That's the slowest one. Okay? The fastest one goes around at 15,000 revolutions per minute. Okay? Your hard drives don't spin at all. Your hard drives are a different kind. We'll get to that hard drive section, but they're really memory. Your hard drives are really memory. There are no moving components in the kind of hard drive you guys have. They're called solid state. This is not testable, but there's nothing moving in here. Inside here is just a bunch of memory. It's a different kind of memory. It's kind of like a flash drive, in that it's permanent, and it can write to it, and it writes to it really, really fast, which is why these laptops, which are slightly older, run perfectly fine, because we don't put regular hard drives in them. If you guys check one out of the library, and you're like, this one sucks. They don't have solid state drives, only the student ones do, not the sign-up ones. Okay? Okay, so that's hard drives. There's lots of things stored on hard drive that are really, really important to us, though. Okay? The most important thing on a hard drive, which is part of what we're going to talk about, is the operating system, or OS. That's an I. Okay, so if I say the OS, I'm talking about the operating system. In our case today, we're talking about Windows 10. You guys in your life have used probably 3 different operating systems. You guys have probably used Windows XP, Windows 7, and Windows 10, at least here at National Intro. You may have used lots of other ones that are out there. Okay, if you're a Mac user, you've used Mac OSs. Okay, but the operating system is what makes all that hardware that we're talking about now work, and it's stored on the hard drive. Okay, in the case of this computer, right there, I think I still have it on my desk. Its hard drive is a little tiny. I don't know if I have it on my desk. I had it on my desk. I may have moved. Put it away somewhere. Darn it! I didn't leave it. Oh yeah. Nope. Yeah, this isn't one. I'll pretend it is. It looks about like this. It's a little tiny solid state drive that holds all the information on that on one little kind of weird looking chip. Generally, they're spinny drives like that, and sometimes they're solid states. And the faster your drive is, the faster this loads when you start your computer. Because every computer has an operating system on it, including his iPad. Okay, it has the iOS. Okay, iOS. The OS stands for operating system. Okay, it has probably iOS version 9. I don't know what version he's got on his iPad, but all of them have some operating system which turns everything that's going on in that computer to some kind of usable GUI. That's a GUI. Or graphical user interface. That's what GUI stands for. Okay. So iOS provides a very specific GUI that Apple came up with. It's supposed to be easier to use for everybody. Okay. Windows 10 came up with a new GUI. It looks different than it did before. Windows 7 GUI looked different than Windows XP GUI. But the purpose of that operating system is to make that hard drive usable, or that hardware usable in some way, and to provide us some kind of nice graphical user interface that we look at, and we touch, and we see, and we click things on. Okay? That's the most important thing stored on the hard drive. Without question. If that doesn't work, it doesn't boot, we cry because I just bought the iPad, just went out of warranty, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have dropped it in the pond, whatever. Okay? Operating system's most important. Then we have our documents, which are also traditionally stored on the hard drive. Okay? We have lots of hard drives here at Trail that we can store our documents to. Everybody has an S drive, right? Ian can get to his S drive from his iPad. He may never have done it before, but he can. Everybody can get to their network drive. It's just another drive somewhere else in the cloud, right? When you guys go to Google Docs, you're going to a drive. Okay? That's why it's called Google Drive. It's a hard drive somewhere, on a computer somewhere, that you are reading and writing from. Just like when we go to our network drive, it's a drive. It's on a computer in the main closet, okay? But all those documents are stored on permanent drives so they don't go away when we restart our computer, okay? And that's the difference when we say permanent and temporary, or permanent and volatile. When I restart my computer, everything in memory goes away. It's totally cleared out. It's being held there by electrical power. When the electrical power is interrupted, it's gone. But on hard drives, whether they're solid state drives or spinny drives, those don't go away just because power went away. And that's the difference between those two kinds of drives. Okay, so those are the two most important things that we got on our hard drive. Number one is our operating system, and number two, if we save stuff there, are our documents. This particular PC has a protection system on it. You can't save anything to it unless you know the administrative password, and it's just made to never save anything to it. It's made to just run an operating system, and then it gets to our server and stuff. Okay, next thing you may or may not have in any given computer is an optical drive. This is also considered secondary storage. It's also considered permanent. Okay, I don't know what that squiggle on the end, we'll pretend that just says permanent without my squiggle. Okay, and when we say optical drive, you know, it used to mean CD drive, then it means DVD, now it means Blu-ray, depends on what you have on your computer. Everybody here at school has a DVD on their ones that we issue out. All the teachers have DVD burners. I don't know if we have a single Blu-ray here at school, but they're all really the same things. They're written slightly differently, but it's just image burned into an optical disc that you can run an operating system off of. You can save things to, depending on what kind of optical drive you have. So it's very much, it connects up exactly like a hard drive, okay? It's just ridiculously slower than any hard drive, okay? And so if we say that a hard drive is slow compared to memory, an optical drive is the same speed slower almost compared to a hard drive, okay? But it is also secondary storage, and it also is considered permanent. If you write to an optical disk, it's there until you delete it. You can delete things from certain kinds of optical disks as well. Okay, so our next part is our video card. Every single computer has to have a video card. There has to be some way for us to see what is going on. So that video may be integrated. I don't know why that just happened right there. My writing is getting worse. Or it may be expansion. Wow, my pen is not writing well. I'm going to check that out. Okay, so integrated means it's part of these integrated components. This has a video card on the motherboard. There's a plug right there on the motherboard. Okay, so it could be an integrated video card that is part of the motherboard that creates that, or it could be an expansion card that we plug in to our, yeah, it is. Okay, so we plug in, to give us video. And like we said the other day, motherboards are smart. If you add one on, it assumes you like it better than the one it had. Okay? So if you add on one, it usually disables, usually not always, sometimes they still work, but usually disables this and says, okay, you want to use this instead. Okay? So video cards can be integrated or expansion. It's what creates our display and makes what we see. Okay? Expansion cards are almost, I'm going to say, here we'll throw out a weird number, I'm going to say 97% of the time better than whatever's on the motherboard. Almost always. I can't say always, always. You could put in a really crappy one with a good one on the motherboard, of course, okay? But usually expansion cards are better, particularly for gaming, okay? If you're a gamer or you're doing some kind of advanced graphic stuff, an expansion card is always going to be your choice. We have very few expansion cards here at Trail, none in student systems. However, every teacher system has one, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to have a display here and a display on our desk. That's how we're able to clone, because if you have a video card with two displays, you can just say clone them, so whatever's over there is what's over here. So we do have expansion cards on our many, not all, many of our staff systems, and it's what makes that. We have a whole chapter that we talk about video cards, because video cards in themselves have the processing power superior to PCs just 5 years ago. Okay, they have their own processor, they have their own memory. They can be fantastically expensive. My son has a video card that's more expensive than his brother's whole PC. He graduated from college and spent like $500 or something on this video card. Okay, so video cards can be very, very, very powerful, or they can be really, really wimpy, and the whole point is just to get a monitor hooked up, and that's a wimpy one. Okay, but that's the point of a video card. Every computer has to have one, or they're completely unusable to us. Here at National Trail, and really everywhere anymore, every computer has to have some kind of NIC or network interface card. Whether they're wired or wireless, it still has a network interface card. It used to be everything had a wired and some things had wireless. Now anymore, many, many times you buy a brand new laptop and it has no wired at all. My good laptop at home has no wired connection whatsoever. It's only wireless. So everything has one of those two, whether it's wired or wireless. This is a picture of a network card, and it could be integrated. Right there's the picture of the port right there, or it could be an expansion card, and it could be wireless. But everything really anymore, I don't know why anyone would ever want or ever have a computer that has no network interface. We are a wired world anymore, right? Just I can't even fathom it. Now we just got a bunch of Air Force ones where they actually took out all the wireless cards. I guess it's so that people couldn't get on networks on these laptops. So I guess there are places, there are very specific niches, like a classified laptop, where you don't want people to accidentally get on wireless, that you might take it out, but I don't think they make a laptop anymore that doesn't have it by default. Somebody had to go in and pull those cards, and we just have found a couple laptops already this year that we issued out, and when Garrett and Andrew were making them new ones this summer, they didn't even realize. Because when we make them, they're all connected. They're all wired, so just a couple of them were missed. So we've got network interface cards. They can be either integrated or expansion. There's a whole bunch of different speeds available, and we'll talk about those too when we get to that section. Okay, the last kind of most important thing of any PC is the power supply. Okay, this is obviously a required component of some part. In your laptop, you know, your power supply is an adapter like this, right? You've got an adapter, but it's still got a power supply. When you're not connected, you've got a battery that's still providing power to your PC, and Ian's iPad, he's got a battery inside there, and then he's got to use the iPad power brick to supply and bring that up. But all of our PCs have some kind of power supply. That's actually the first part chapter that we go to. Some of these things we did in reverse of what we get to. So it supplies power to everything. Everything that's connected to a PC requires power of some sort. Okay? Even your mouse has to have power. It gets it through the USB, right? It gets power through the USB. That's how the light came on. In the case of these older mice that have roller balls, there's still electronics inside there. It's getting power. So the power supply is what plugs into the outside power and converts it to our electronic power. And they're totally different. The kind of power that's coming out of this wall has nothing to do with the kind of power that we want inside electronics. Subject of chapter 3, but this is a transformer rectifier. It transforms alternating current to direct current for us, and then it steps it way down or rectifies it from up at 115 down to between 3 and 12 volts of power. So it does a bunch of stuff, and it has a bunch of different kinds of plugs, and the kind of plug that we need is determined again by the motherboard. Okay, you can't just get any power supply and plug in any power supply in anything. There's a very specific plug that's required for whatever kind of motherboard you got. So that motherboard form factor determines the kind of power supply we buy, and then all the components determine what kind of plugs we need on that power supply. Okay, it is the most easily broken part of our PC, and in some ways that's very lucky. Okay, because it is also, pull that on myself, it's also the easiest part to replace on our PC. Okay, because this plugs directly into the wall. Whenever we have surges or spikes, electrical storms, bad power from dark electric, whatever, it usually takes out our power supply. And when it takes out our power supply, it's literally 4 screws in the back and a bunch of plugs we have to unplug, and we can stick a new one in for 25 bucks. Okay, so it's the easiest to replace part inside our PC, or one of the easiest, and it's usually the one that goes out first. Okay. So those are our parts that we just went through, and those are really the subjects of the chapters that we're going to go through in the hardware class. We're going to spend a lot more time on some of them. Let's see, power supplies are chapter 3. Chapter 4 really are motherboards and CPUs. Chapter 5 is memory. Chapter 6 is hard drives. I think this is chapter 7. And chapter 8 kind of is lumped with, no, that's what that. I just made my line wrong. This is chapter 6, and this is chapter 7. And then we jump all the way to chapter 15 and 16. We skip all the chapters in the middle, okay? Which is talking about how to pick parts and how to buy parts, and then how to do repairs and stuff too. That's what the last 2 chapters are about, which is the whole subject of the 4th quarter. We will get through chapter 1 and chapter 2 and chapter 3 easily this quarter, chapter 4 next quarter, maybe chapter 5 next quarter. The more time that we have at the end, the more time we spend on chapter 15 and 16 and do some other writing projects and stuff too. Okay, so that's hardware. So when we talk about the difference between software and hardware, hardware is the stuff that we can touch and feel. If I say, is this part hardware or software? If I said part, then it's hardware, okay? Because you can touch it. Software is the stuff that runs on the hardware that has no physical, I can't think of the vocabulary word, but anyways, you get the idea. It's stuff that runs on our computer. It's stuff that we load to our computer, okay? So what's the biggest piece of software that I already mentioned?
OS.
OS, okay? So the biggest and most important OS, or piece of software is our OS. That may be by Microsoft, it may be by Apple Computer, or it may be another piece altogether. There are, I'm going to say 3 major operating systems today, okay? And I'm going to categorize these really strange, but I'm going to say Microsoft, which equals Windows, is one of the major operating systems. Now there's tons of ones by Microsoft, right? If you guys have been around as long as I have, first one was called DOS, or the Disk Operating System, okay? DOS ran on original IBM PC. It came on these floppy drives like this that were called floppy drives because they're floppy. And DOS had no mouse component. It was just all command line. You had to know all the commands correctly to run it. And then we got Windows 3.1. Where'd the other ones go? I have no idea. And then we had 95, and then we had 98, and then we had 98 second edition, and then we had ME, and we had NT, and we had 2000, and we had 2003, which came out when we got XP, and then we had 2008, which came out when we had Vista. These are server ones. And then we had 2008 R2, which came out when we had 7, and then we had 8, and we had 8.1, and we had 2012 R2, and now we have Windows 10, and Windows 16 is about ready to come out. Okay, all those are Microsoft operating systems. Some of them were abysmal failures, right? Windows ME was an abysmal failure. Really, Windows Vista was an abysmal failure. Those two were like, if we could have skipped those, that would have been great. Windows 8 was really an abysmal failure, but 8.1 fixed a lot of the problems with 8. So there was a bunch of, these are all Microsoft operating systems, okay? And then, oh, I got ahead of myself. And then the next biggest one, I'm going to just say Apple. Okay? Apple had a number, you know what, I didn't even get to the phone operating systems that were on there because there's other embedded ones that Microsoft came out as well. Apple has something's wrong with my pen. Mac OSs, and then what I'm going to just say iOS for its mobile devices. And then I'm not even going to try to go through the list of those because I will get it wrong because I'm not a Mac person. I don't know all Mac OSs. I do know that their version 10, Windows is kind of copying now. They're saying there's not going to be a version after 10. It's just going to be different versions of 10. So Windows is saying that now too. We're not going to, 10 is the last operating system. We're just going to have versions of 10. I don't know how that doesn't make the last operating system. So we've got Microsoft, we've got Apple, and then, and then we've got Linux. Did somebody just say that?
Yeah.
Okay, and then we've got Linux. Okay, which you may or may not have ever done. You will install Linux in the classroom. You will be forced to use Linux for a whole week on your laptop. Okay, as an OS, I know what I'm going to do about Ian. I might have to force him to take a laptop from me for a week. Okay, Linux, I'm going to say his name wrong, but Linus Torvalds took a mainframe operating system called Unix and made Linux. Okay, it's open source, meaning that anybody can go and get the code for this and make their own version. And there are tons of different versions of Linux out there. We use one called Ubuntu here at school. That's what runs Moodle, it runs our website, it runs our EdTech Teach site. It runs a print server for Apple devices. And Chrome is built on Linux. Okay, so if you use the Chrome browser or you have a Chrome desktop, or Chromebook. It's built on Linux. And there are, I'm going to go to DistroWatch just to show you. There are tons of different versions of Linux. And there's usually a thing over here on the side. There we go. Okay, so this is the last 6 months. This is the top, oh, I went too far. I think it shows the top 100. There we go. Those are the top 100 downloads just from their site of versions of Linux. So there's a lot of them. And at any point you could go out and take one of these, download it, and Isaac can make, Isaac's Linux distro if he wanted to, and compile it himself and put it on his computer, make his own icons and his own way of doing stuff if he wanted to. Okay. So it's open source, it's free, it's light, it's one way of making old stuff run better. Like I said, we use Ubuntu, we have used OpenSUSE before, we used to be a Fedora site, all of our stuff used to be Fedora, which is a free version of Red Hat. Okay, if you don't know, Fedora is a Red Hat. So a paid company does Red Hat, and they have Fedora as a free version so that you get to test it while they determine what works and what doesn't. So Linux is a different kind of operating system. It's very similar, it's very light, and it's completely free. So if you had an old PC at home and you wanted to make it run faster and just be able to get to the internet, not that it doesn't have a bunch of other stuff too, it does. Linux is a great version that you could revive an old PC if you were just trying to have an internet browser or be able to do stuff at home. So there's tons of different versions of Linux, but that's really, it's not a manufacturer. It's maintained by millions of people all over the place. But is the other main operating system out there today. And like I said, we use one called Ubuntu, and that's what you guys will install. We'll get a spare hard drive, and you guys will install that on your laptops during Chapter 2, and you'll play with it for a few days, and just to give yourself an idea of what it's like. Okay. So the other software that's out there are programs like Microsoft Office, Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Paint. All that stuff is software that runs inside the operating system. You have to have an operating system to get to the other stuff, which is one of the things that's both Mac and Linux are better than Windows in that they require less hardware just to get to their operating system. Windows 10 is not as bad as Windows 8 and even Windows 7 as far as being a huge pig on resources. It is better than it has been. But it's amazing when you look at Linux. And I can take, with Linux, I've got it. I can take one CD, Linux CD, and actually it's a DVD, okay, but it barely takes a DVD. I take one DVD for Linux, I can install it on a PC, and not only does it have an operating system, it has every single program I probably want on there as well. Whereas Microsoft, you're going to use a full DVD, and all you got when you're done is WordPad and Paint, and the ability to buy other software. Okay, so Microsoft is kind of a pig when it comes to that. Whereas the other ones are less so. It used to be when we had other versions, in fact, all the way through XP, I could have a really small hard drive. Teachers used to have on their computers 6 gigabyte hard drives. That's how big their drives were. Okay, and they still had room to save their stuff. As soon as we went to Windows 7, the smallest I could fit anything on was a 40. So it's a 40 gig drive, and even then they'd fill up all the time. So we had to buy a bunch of 80 gig drives, where before we were working on 6 or 13. So sold those on eBay and moved on. But Microsoft really started taking up tons and tons of room. You guys have 60 gig solid states in yours, and you have about 20 gig free. of hard drive space, and Windows 10 really used less than Windows 7. You have more space now than you did last year available on your hard drive. Okay, so that is, and I really got done right on time because that's where I wanted to be. That is the basic overview of hardware for Chapter 1. Okay, and I know it's basic, okay? I know it's a very basic overview. At this point, where are we at? Switch to, well, it doesn't matter. So if we go down here to how computers work, I need you guys to make sure you've read through the entire, this one belongs up there, I got those out of order, the entire first 5 sections and watch the associated videos. I know that I've gone through this. You guys should be like, I got that. I got that. We just went over basically that, and we're going to go over the boot sequence. This goes the other way. Next class, we're going to talk about the exact boot sequence and how things happen as we turn on a PC. Because when we push the power button, a lot of things happen that you guys don't even know about because it happens in less than 10 seconds when all those things happen. But PC boot sequence kind of helps us troubleshoot PCs and know what's going wrong inside our PC when we're doing it. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing next class.